Okay, what am I looking at?
Hvannadalshnúkur.
Vanodalsnook?
Hvannadalshnúkur.
Vanosdalsnook?
Hvannadalshnúkur.
Vanodalsnook? Oh, God. I was driving down the road, and there's this scene over here to the left of me, which just immediately caught my attention. It's one of the hard things about driving in Iceland is you tend to get almost like a rubberneck thing, where you're always looking around at everything and checking to see if there might be something of interest. And there's no guardrails. There's nothing on these roads here. Nothing to keep you inside the bounds. Yeah, I would not want to drive a truck on these roads. No way. Anyway, yes, so I stopped on the side of the road because over here there's this really fantastic black sand beach. It looks quite beautiful, and I love the fact that you have this super minimal dark canvas underpinning these elements. Yeah, this is really cool. As you can see, there's just all these fantastic rocks that have all found their way out here. And if I had to guess, I mean, the only way they could get here is from that, up there. And there's a giant hill. And so these rocks most likely just eventually found their way down the hill. Who knows how long it took or how long these have been here. But one thing that I do know is that I would not want to be driving down this road and to have one of these rocks hit the side of my car, because they are pretty large. I'm going to wander around a little bit here and hopefully not leave too many footprints in places where I'd like to shoot. But it feels like there's a composition of interest here. So this is one of those things where it's kind of hard to tell whether you should, pitch up or pitch down, and what kind of angle you want. And I think part of the challenge for me in this is figuring out where the horizontal line is out here. Like, if you go up and down, do you have elements conflicting with each other? Do you have lines that start to crisscross over one another? And I think that's kind of the case with these grassy dunes out here, where it's kind of hard to get the right height so that all of this so that you have some sufficient depth in the photo, and you don't have a problem with going back later in post and then looking at your photo and being like, damn, why didn't I just move the tripod like 6 inches higher or lower, because it would have been so much better. I have an extra tall tripod because I am an extra tall person. Well, not just because of that. The extra height really does come in handy, but I'm almost like 6'5", and having a tall tripod that I can actually stand up straight and look through the viewfinder with is amazing compared to like a regular tripod. So with this, I got it pitched up high using a 16 to 35 millimeter fantastic L lens, and I'm pretty close to these rocks here, but I think I have sufficient depth of field so that I'll have sharp focus all the way through the frame, or at least I hope. It seems to be the case, and we're gonna give it a shot.
So I apologize for the rather poor audio quality in that segment, but as you can see, the winds were getting very strong. And to make matters worse, the batteries had died in my audio recorder, and I had to use the mic on my camera instead, which is just not a very high quality mic at all. So I'll try to explain a little bit more about what it was that I was trying to accomplish there when composing the image. The thing that I was very much paying attention to was trying to find just the right position of the camera, both horizontally and vertically. And the reason that was important was because looking out across this landscape, this beautiful black sand beach with all these boulders on it. I wanted to make sure that each and every boulder could be seen individually so that you could see the entire boulder. Because if I was just a little bit too far to the left or a little bit too far to the right, then one boulder would then be in front of the other one and they would overlap. And it just looked bunched up. Like it just looked almost like a clogged artery or something, like in one part of the image. I very much wanted a sight line looking across the sand that would give me just the right view where you could see that water moving between each rock. I'm not sure this is absolutely perfect, but it was the best one that I could find after moving back and forth on that beach. And then there was the question of where to position the camera vertically. If I positioned the camera too low on the tripod, then I ran into this problem where, again, you'd have boulders visually overlapping each other. But then there was also a bigger problem where those grassy dunes in the back would break through that horizon line. And that was not at all what I wanted. I very much wanted an image with a very clean, horizontal horizon line in the back to give this really nice, strong separation of sky and midground and foreground. And in order to achieve that, those dunes had to be below the horizon line, but not just below the line, like intentionally below the line. And what I mean by that is that if the dunes crest up and touch the horizon line, then I think it looks like a mistake because the lines overlap one another. So you have to get the tripod just a little bit higher so that those dunes pull back and pull down from that horizon, and you get just enough of a gutter there to make that distinction between the elements. Honestly, I could have gone a little bit higher here, and maybe I could have photoshopped it to give it a little more separation, but I think it's fine the way it is. So, unfortunately, that is not the end of the story from that day in Iceland. I say unfortunately because this happened. While I was out there on that black sand beach and I was doing some vlogging, a gust of wind came through and hit my tripod with my Canon 5D Mark IV mounted on top. And the whole thing just blew right over into that soupy, seawater saturated black sand. And I almost got it, by the way. I grabbed one of the legs as it was falling down, but by that point it had just too much momentum and I couldn't stop the camera from falling, and it just went right into that sand. And unfortunately that sand was so saturated with seawater that the camera, it was like quicksand, like it went down into it like a good 3 or 4 inches. When I pulled the camera out and I looked at it, I wasn't too concerned about it, quite honestly, because it's part of the reason why you buy weather-sealed cameras like a 5D Mark IV is because things like this happen when you're out shooting landscape photography. This wasn't the first time I've had a camera fall over like that. But when I pulled the camera out and I looked at it and it was so coated in sand and seawater and all of that, I just had a feeling that this was not good. And the camera had power, it seemed to work, like the screens were all on, it functioned fine. There was a bunch of sand obviously in the buttons and the dials and stuff, which is just a whole nother story. But I just got uncomfortable with it and I thought, I'm going to leave, I'm gonna go clean it, and then I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna pick up everything from where I left off, because my guest house was not that far away from where I was that morning. So I went back and I cleaned it up. I even borrowed a hairdryer from the family who owned the guest house where I was staying, and I dried it out. I put the battery back in, turned it on, and it was completely dead. So dead. Nothing on it worked. It was in that moment that I started to panic. And the reason why was because I knew how screwed I was. I was absolutely screwed. And the reason I was so screwed, well, there's actually a few reasons why. First reason why I was screwed was because I was in Iceland, and Iceland is just not the kind of place where you can just run down to a big box electronics store and pick up a replacement for something. It's also not the kind of place where you can get something shipped to you overnight or second day, you know, from Amazon or B&H or anything like that. It's just not that kind of place. To make matters worse, I was all the way over on the eastern side of the country, and the only way I could possibly get a replacement camera was through Reykjavik, which is all the way over to the west, many hours away. Then the other reason why I knew I was screwed was because when I was leaving Iceland in a couple of days, I was not flying directly home to the United States. Rather, I was flying over to Lofoten, Norway, the archipelago of islands up in the north. And if there's any place in the world that's more remote than Iceland and harder to get things, it's Lofoten. I mean, I think there's maybe 25 or 30,000 people who live there. Not the kind of place where you can just run out and buy a Canon 5D Mark IV. Then finally, to make matters even worse, it was on the weekend. And on the weekend in Iceland, everything closes. Like all the retail stores are closed. There's just no way to go out and buy a camera quickly. I started thinking about what could I do, because I was flying out of Reykjavik on Sunday. I was heading straight over to Lofoten, and there was no way that I could go to Lofoten without a proper camera. I had my Canon M50 with me, which I was, you know, shooting some video on, but it's really not a camera for photography. And I had a Fuji X100F with me, which is also a great camera, but it's just, it's not that kind of camera. So after I calmed down, I started looking around at the different boutique camera stores that were in Reykjavik, and all of them were closed. I decided I was gonna take a chance, and I was just gonna start calling them on the phone. And lo and behold, this store named Becco, someone picked up the phone, and much to my surprise, and I told him my story, I told him what was going on, and the man said, well, I don't have a Canon 5D Mark IV, but I do have a Canon 6D Mark II in stock. If you want to come get it, and I will meet you there, I'll open the store for you. Obviously, you know, a 6D Mark II is not quite as good as a 5D Mark IV, which is like a topic for a whole nother video, but at least it was something. And at least I had a full frame camera that I could mount my EF lenses on. So I drove over to Reykjavik. I met the man at Becco, and he was super nice, and he looked at the camera and he was like, oh yeah, he's like, this thing is totally shot. So I ended up buying a 6D Mark II, which is what I'm filming this on right now, and obviously paid a pretty price for it because everything is expensive in Iceland. But I mean, I really had no other choice. So long story short, I made it through the rest of the trip using my new 6D Mark II, and it ended up being a pretty awesome camera, I have to say. It doesn't have the same resolution or dynamic range as the 5D Mark IV. It's also crippled in some other ways, but it does have an articulating screen on the back, which I really love using. And unfortunately, this old 5D Mark IV just doesn't have that. Oh, by the way, I am recording this right now, in case you haven't noticed, in a completely new little studio space that I'm putting together to be recording videos just like this one. I haven't quite figured it out. I'm putting things together piece by piece and learning from doing. For example, I know for a fact my voice is probably booming all over the place right now because I don't have anything to dampen it with. But I plan to tweak it and to optimize it and to, you know, just kind of figure it out as I go along, because I think creating these types of videos where I'm, you know, not just doing voiceover, but, you know, providing some additional commentary and some additional content really helps complete the story, especially in videos like this one from Iceland. And I also have an interest in just talking about the other side of photography, you know, like what happens when you return home and you're editing photos and you're processing them, because I think that is very much part of the story as well. That's really where images get created. And I think it would help complete the narrative and the story of what's going on when I'm out in the field and I'm doing vlogging work out there. I'm still figuring this out. It's slowly coming together, but so far at least it seems to be working pretty well. So Thanks for being here. I hope you enjoyed this rather sad story from Iceland. The trip kind of ended on somewhat of a sour note, but my experience in Lofoten thereafter was really fantastic. I had a great trip. The 6D Mark II performed really quite well. I'll put a link, I think it's here. I can't remember. I'll put a link up here to the other video if you're interested in seeing that. But at any rate, thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time.